Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Rita from the Wood County Committee on Aging. We are very excited here to offer a diverse type of programs, and we were so lucky to find Lauren Stewart here, and she is a naturalist for ODNR. Now, Lauren, you've done lots of presentations for us, so if you have missed any, we have recorded those, and those are on our WCCWA YouTube channel, and I welcome you to go there and take a look at the videos, along with lots of other ones that we have recorded. But today, very excited, we're going to be focusing on common wildflowers of Ohio. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here and doing this for us.
Absolutely. So I am Lauren. I'm based out of Maumee Bay State Park, for those who don't know me. We're going to talk about flowers. 'Tis the season. We are at the spring, even though I know technically March is when spring starts. Here in Northwest Ohio, it tends to start a little bit later, thanks to Lake Erie managing to keep us a little colder throughout the spring. We've actually had an unseasonably warm spring this year, so some of our flowers have gone a little bit early. So this is the perfect time to begin looking for flowers. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of common flowers. Some of the flowers are common throughout the state. Us in Northwest Ohio, it's a little bit trickier because Lake Erie used to be a lot bigger. And so when Lake Erie receded to its current size, it left a whole bunch of clay deposits. And with that, we got our Great Black Swamp, which has changed a lot of the soil composition. So some of the wildflowers that we see throughout the state are actually absent in Northwest Ohio because it's basically just too wet for them. But the oak opening region is actually a really good place to see almost all of the wildflowers, just because of the soil different composition, because basically that's where the sand dunes shoreline of the glacial Lake Warren was. So we're going to be talking about some common wildflowers and some maybe not so common in Ohio, Northwest Ohio, but the rest of the state. So if you ever get a chance to do a drive, especially like Central Ohio right now, has some really good wildflowers. In Southern Ohio, they're pretty much getting towards their peak in terms of wildflowers. They are a little bit ahead of us in terms of season. So actually, I'm going to talk about that purple flower right there. That's wild geranium, and that is found here in Northwest Ohio. My favorite place to see it is Wildwood Metro Park. They have them everywhere there. And the really cool part about these, you can always find them consistently blooming around Mother's Day. So that first weekend in May is a really good time to look for those wild geraniums. So we're going to be talking about a few different things. So spring is the time of year to see them, and there's going to be the spring wildflowers. A lot of these wildflowers we're showing are called ephemeral. So ephemeral basically means that it comes in the spring and they're not long lasting. So they're not going to be going throughout the whole year. So we do have some perennial plants that bloom a lot longer than these wildflowers, but they're kind of just like almost like ghosts. They're here, they're gone. We will talk about 2 native flowering trees, which are really good to add to a native plant garden that you have. And then we're going to go through and go to the next season and talk about some of our few summer blooming roadside flowers. There is a little quiz. You don't have to do it, but there is something just to test your knowledge of what you learned in this presentation today. And then I have a whole bunch of resources at the end. The Division of Wildlife has an amazing field guide that's completely free. You can request a print of it, or you can actually just view it online. It's an awesome guide, and I'll show you it at the very end. So a really good way to kind of figure out, especially if you're using that field guide, what kind of flowers you're looking at, is to be able to determine if they're actinomorphic, so they're regular. There's more than one dividing plane. So if you look at this flower on the left-hand side, you can cut through and it could be symmetrical in multiple ways. However, the zygomorphic, or the irregular, is there's only one way to make it symmetrical on either side. So we can only do it that vertical cross section for it to remain symmetrical. So it's a really good way to kind of narrow down when you're trying to identify wildflowers or just flowers in general, whether they are regular or irregular, because it can kind of really help narrow the field, especially if you go by color and if they're regular or irregular, the shape of them. So here's some examples of what the flowers might look like rather than just the kind of cheesy drawings. So the radiosymmetry, so the regular flowers are going to have that radial symmetry. So if we go back and look at that wild geranium, it is a regular flower. As we can go through, you can see those easy dividing lines. Versus this one over here. So if you think of like irises, and a lot of our native orchids are going to have that zygomorphic. Or if you can picture what a violet looks like, the violets are going to have either the bigger tops, the smaller bottom petals, but they're going to only have this one bilateral line of symmetry. So here's a sunflower versus a violet. So the sunflower, we can see that it's going to have multiple lines of symmetry. So we know that one is a regular flower versus this bird's foot violet is going to have only one bilateral line of symmetry, and it's going to end up being the irregular. So speaking of different flowers, and one of the hairbringers of spring is appropriately named the spring beauty. So we notice the spring beauties, they can bloom as early into March, like pretty much around when spring hits here. It all really depends on the snowfall. And a lot of times you'll see them kind of popping through that light snow dustings we have as well. But they are identified as pretty much one of the earliest blooming. We do have one earlier blooming one. It doesn't look quite like what you would imagine as a typical, when we think of wildflowers, spring wildflowers, it's the stunt cabbage. But the spring beauty is, when you think of flowers, this is going to be the first blooming flower we're going to see in this area. And they're actually fairly small. They're kind of like, they almost like their flowers like button size. They're pretty tiny, and they're going to be ranging from almost bright white to this kind of like lavendery pink. And they're going to have that strict, regular style flower. So they're going to have multiple lines of symmetry. It's a really easy way to identify them in the fact that they bloom so early. So they're not very tall. You're going to find them closer to the ground, but these are our hairbringers of spring. We know spring is around the corner if we finally see the spring beauties in bloom. And here's some more examples of what the spring beauties look like. They can kind of almost cover the forest floors when they're first starting to bloom, and they're oftentimes found in the undergrowth. You're going to find them more in shaded areas rather than like in the middle of the lawn in direct sun. However, that doesn't not necessarily mean that they won't be there, but they're more likely to find them, like especially if you're walking along the trail, you'll see them bloom in the undergrowth. This one's one of my favorites. It's more common in the South. This flower is definitely an irregular flower, and it just cracks me up, its names, because it really does look like it. Dutchman's breeches. I just see a little person wearing these as pantaloons. They are going to, again, be a more woodland undergrowth plant. They have this foliage that almost kind of reminds me of carrot tops. So they're going to be really lacy looking foliage, but their blooms, they bloom almost in an arc. So you're going to find them in this arc along almost like a stem, and it's going to be arcing over and kind of bending. And these are often eaten by a lot of forest animals. They're really a lot of especially when the woodchucks and the raccoons and the squirrels are getting out, they're really hungry. They're looking for them. The deer also will feed on them as well. They are a favorite of a lot of animals. Here's a relative of Dutchman breeches, squirrel corn. So you can see the Dutchman breeches is on the left-hand side, and the squirrel corn is on the right-hand side. The squirrel corn is almost going to look like a white bleeding heart. They're going to have this very, very distinct, long, elongated heart shape versus the Dutchman breeches that almost looks like the upside-down pants. And the squirrel corn is going to be a lot smaller in terms of total plant size. And again, it's going to have a much smaller bloom than the Dutchman breeches. And as you can notice, it's going to have a more upright, the flowers sit more upright on the bracts versus the Dutchman breeches, which have heavier flowers. So it tends to kind of fall over. So speaking of flowers, this one is one of the most important ones because this is the state of Ohio's official flower, a large flower trillium. And trillium, its name kind of gives it away because trillium, they're always going to be in multiples of 3. So the flower itself is going to have 3. The leaves are usually going to be in 3. So it kind of is like 3 stacked on top of each other. And there's a couple of different species of trillium. The large flowered trillium is going to be one of the largest and showiest. These are, again, undergrowth found in the forest plants. So you're going to see them in the woodlands. You're not going to see them out by the marshes. Like if we go to Maumee Bay, we're not going to see these. There's a lot of semi-aquatic flowers that we can find, but finding our ephemeral wildflowers are a lot harder, especially in the swampy areas. But large flowered trillium, really good places to see in a lot of our metro parks. Gall Woods Nature Preserve and Archbold actually has a lot of these wildflowers, as well as a lot of our metro parks in this area, and Maumee State Forest has a great deal of these. So for a lot of these wildflowers, you have to go a little bit further west, or you have to go south to see them. The closer we get to the lake, the less likely we are to see, especially the ephemeral wildflowers. So here's our large flowered trillium. They can come in kind of a pink morph form. However, the white by far is going to be the most common you see. But if you do see a pink one, it's not out of the norm, but it's kind of like finding a 4-leaf clover. They're not going to be commonly seen, but you might get to see one. They, like the Dutchman's breeches and the spring beauties, can kind of form a carpet. You're going to find them usually growing in clumps. And Sessile Trillium, also known as toadshade, is actually one of the more common trilliums I find around here. I find them really easy to identify based on their leaves. So even if they're not in bloom, if you look at their leaf pattern, essentially it's going to look like someone has splotched it with bleach almost. So you're getting that dark and that light color, and you're going to have that distinctive tri-formation, the distinct 3 leaves grouped together, and it's going to be really short to the ground. A large flowering trillium tends to, like, they have pretty big blooms, versus the toadshade, you're looking at like quarter size blooms. So they're much, much smaller in terms of size, but this by far is one of the most common ones you can find here in this area. This one's one of my favorites, Virginia Bluebell. This one's a little more common farther south. We can find them here. They're not going to be nearly in the numbers as they are further south. But if you go to like central Ohio in spring, it is beautiful in terms of they basically carpet the ground. They have these really delicate blooms that tend to always almost face the ground. They look almost like blue trumpets, and they form beautiful carpets. And here's a kind of an example of a forest floor. I mean, literally you'll look out and it's just almost like a field of blue. And they're one of the few flowers that have that truly kind of I can't think of the word for it, but it's a true blue, versus it's not going to be a purple that we call blue. It's not going to be like a really deep purple violet. It actually is a blue color. So Virginia Bluebells are one we can find. Now they can range to almost pink, but for the most part, you are seeing that blue concentrated color. And as their flowers die and tend to fade, they actually get more purple, but they are a beautiful sight to see. And again, they are really known for forming these dense carpets, essentially on the forest floor when they're in bloom. They're just a wonderful plant. Wild blue phlox. So like I mentioned, the bluebells, they're blue, but the blue phlox is actually more of a purple. These can also form some carpeting, but they're going to have that easily discernible radial symmetry. They're going to be really open and kind of like that really big star shape. These are really important for a lot of our early pollinators because they produce flowers en masse. And so for those insects that are really starting to get into the swing of things after being in that brumation, they're ready for these flowers here. So blue phlox, great flower. We can find them in this area. Again, not as common, but I have seen them here. Now this one, super common everywhere. All throughout Ohio. These are the ones that are going to really be found in our lawns. So when we're getting those first blooming flowers like the dandelions and the blue flowers that bloom in our lawns before we do our first mow, it's usually the common blue violet. They really like to grow in high traffic areas. And the great part about them is they are edible. So their flowers are edible, their leaves are edible. They're really for humans. They're actually really important food sources to a lot of our native species of butterfly and moths. So this plant is super awesome. It's related to the pansies. So it's in the pansy family. So they're really great to have around, and they're super important for bumblebees. And what's really cool about the violets is you can actually use their flowers. You can make a tea out of them. So you put them in hot water, let them soak a little bit and strain them out. And the tea ends up being kind of like a purple color. And you can actually do pH testing with them. So you can see how acidic something is because it actually does a color change. I have a video on the ODNR page on YouTube about it. It's a really fun one. I did it myself. I was like a child, entertained. I loved it. It was super exciting. So if you ever are looking for a science experiment, since we're in the spring, perfect timing, make violet tea and then put vinegar in it and you'll see it change color. It's super cool. It changed to bright pink, to brown. It's really neat. So here's some more examples of the common blue violet. So the violets actually come in a variety of shades. You can see them in really dark colors, so a little bit lighter. There is a white morph of them as well. So if you see all these purple flowers and there's just one random white violet, it is still the same species. It's just kind of just a different color morph. But super common. Their leaves are going to be heart shaped. So they're going to like horseshoe to heart shaped leaves. And their flowers are going to be strictly irregular. You're not going to have that nice even radial symmetry. You're going to have that bilateral symmetry for them. And they're really neat. They look different colors underneath UV light. And actually they basically have almost like landing strip lanes for the bees to be able to see where the nectar is, because they rely heavily on our pollinators to pollinate them, and bees see in UV light. So they're highly adapted for their pollinators to come and efficiently visit them. This one is one of my favorites because a lot of our spring wildflowers are going to be in the cooler tones. You're gonna have the blues, you're gonna have the whites, but the fire pink are pretty much one of our brightest ones that you'll see. They're gonna like the more well-drained soil. So you'll find them in oak opening region, but where it's really, you have a lot of clay soil, you're less likely to find these. They're not as tall, but again, they are really good for finding a lot of our pollinators because that bright, easy to see for them even under UV light. They don't form carpets like the Virginia bluebells, but they're pretty distinctive in the field just because you're not seeing that bright color often in the springtime. So they have that distinct, again, that radial, regular style flower. They're going to look like a big star, and a big, bright red star at that. And we have another flower. You can see there's a lot going on there. There's actually poison ivy back in that picture there with on the left-hand side. So if you see those three leaves that are kind of like they look like almost like a cartoon version of a leaf with the little scalloping there. That's actually poison ivy there, which is something when you're looking for wildflowers, you have to be really careful because our poison ivy is starting to leaf out at the same time. And then one of my other favorite plants at the very bottom is going to be, you'll see that purple flower that has the three distinct purple petals that's in the threes. That's actually a spiderwort. And there's actually an Ohio spiderwort that's specific to the state. So there's a lot of neat stuff going on in that picture there. But the fire pink is the star of the show. Really easy to see with that bright red. This one's one of my favorite, May apple. So I'm going to show you a couple different pictures of the May apple, and it's how it looks like when it is getting ready to, like it's budding out and getting ready to open up. So this is May apple buds. A lot of different animals like to eat May apple, and people can eat May apple as well. So you see this May apple busting out. So what I like about May apples is their foliage looks kind of funny. They look like little umbrellas. I just imagine fairies holding them over their heads or umbrellas. They have the distinct palmate style leaves, so they look like hands, and they're always really droopy. They just look like really sad umbrellas. And what's neat about them is not their sad little leaves. Usually you're going to find like basically stems with maybe one or two leaves on it. They look like someone really put a sun beach umbrella, just stuck it in the ground. These are understory plants, so they're going to be in the shade, but what's really neat is the flowers don't bloom on top. They bloom underneath the leaves. So most plants you're seeing that the flowers are the show, but these actually require different pollinators. And so they actually have the flowers basically kind of protected by the leaves as well. And so here's the flower itself. You often don't really see the flower because if you're looking from above, these aren't super tall growing, but if you're looking from above, you're not really going to see them because the leaves are going to block them. But they have this nice regular style flower. The flowers aren't too big, maybe about the size of a $50. And what they produce is an edible fruit, the May apple. And edible by humans, edible by animals. These are actually really sought out plants by a lot of different animals, especially in these late spring, early fall, early summer. So there is our May apple here, super common in the oak opening region. If you go on a trail in any of basically this area, the side of Lucas County, the western side of Lucas County, northern part of Wood County, you're going to see a lot of May apples in the forest understory growth. And they are well named. We do see them in abundance in May. So well-named plant at least. Golden ragwort. So like I mentioned, a lot of our spring flowers aren't really bright, but the fire pink and the golden ragwort are kind of exceptions. They are going to be more bright than the others. You have this bright yellow, highly sought after by pollinators. They have lots of flowers. They're in the daisy family, related to sunflowers, and they have this compound flower head in the center, and then the radial petals on the outside. Their flowers are pretty small. They kind of look gangly. They're almost all over the place. But again, super important plant to our native pollinators coming out in early spring. And on to our blooming trees, which they are blooming right now. This is my favorite native tree that has extreme value, both ornamentally and actually for humans as well. You could make jelly out of their flowers, and super duper important to the native ecosystem in terms of pollinators, and they're wonderful to look at. So this is the eastern redbud. It gets its name, even though its flowers aren't red, it's that bright, almost fuchsia pink. The flowers bloom rather than like at the tips of the branches, they bloom along the branches where the leaves bud out. And that's how they get the name red bud, because the flowers are basically on the buds, which is not common in a lot of different blooming trees. And they basically bloom before they leaf out. So you're getting these trees that are literally covered all along the branches in blooms. And then after the blooms are done, then you get the leaves. But the red buds really important for the pollinators. A lot of birds actually will nectar off of them. So like our first migrants that are coming through, they'll actually pinch off the flowers at the base and get the nectar from the actual flowers themselves. And then the insects as well like to use them. So the birds use them, the bees use them, and then the people, they are excellent in terms of aesthetically pleasing for your yard. And the great part about them, they're not super big trees. So a lot of our trees that look really nice, they get maybe too big, but these trees are going to be the small to mid-sized trees. They're not going to get 80 feet tall. You're looking at like 25 feet tall. Here's some more examples. My favorite time is like right now, this time of year, driving down the side of the road, and you'll see all the different trees blooming right now. And the redbuds are so easy to pick out just because of they're so distinctive and their color is so unique. So here's another example of the redbud tree. The nice part about these trees is they like to grow in the understory as well. So they tolerate a lot of shade really well, which some trees don't, and especially some of the blooming trees like to be in full sun. So having a tree that tolerates a lot of shade and has these beautiful blooms is really nice. And then flowering dogwood. Again, flowering dogwood, really important to our pollinators. Their flowers are going to be much bigger and much more distinctive. They're also going to be regular flowers. So if you look at the redbud flowers up close, they're going to be the irregular. They almost kind of have that orchid-like look to it. They look almost like a dog. So they have that bilateral symmetry versus the dogwoods, which have that nice, easy symmetry for us. Again, they bloom before they leaf out, and they have some pretty distinct blooms. But if you notice the difference of them, their blooms are along the tips versus all the way down the branches of the tree. But they're going to be on the tips of the branches rather than along the branch. And here's the flowering dogwood and redbud together. So they bloom at the same time. So they're just great trees to have. I love them. And as you can see, it's very, very, very aesthetically pleasing when they're blooming together and you have a lot of them. So I highly recommend if you're looking for trees to plant, picking one of those two is good. Dogwoods will tolerate sun a little bit more than the redbuds will, but the redbuds will tolerate shade. So they thrive best when they're in partial shade. However, they both can tolerate shade as well, or sun as well. So common summer wildflowers. So summer is going to come quicker on us than we think it is, but one of the best ones that we find around this area is butterfly milkweed. It's also known as butterfly weed often. There's a lot of different species of milkweed, but this one, especially if you're doing the home garden, is one of the best ones to have in terms of most milkweed is going to be white or pink. This butterfly milkweed has that bright orange. It can almost look like flame color. It can range to almost red, but it's super important for a lot of different species, but specifically the monarch butterfly, of course. Monarch butterflies are specialists, so they require only milkweed to basically, for their larvae to eat, for the caterpillars to eat. So they'll only lay their eggs on milkweed and the caterpillars will only eat milkweed. So butterfly milkweed grows in a lot of different soil types versus some of the other milkweed is more specialist. The only thing with butterfly milkweed, if you have a lot of clay, you're going to have to supplement the soil a little bit. But this doesn't spread quite as crazy as, like, say, the common milkweed will spread. So this is butterfly milkweed, super distinctive in terms of its flower color. But if you do notice, we can see kind of on this picture with the monarch butterfly, they do actually have regular flowers. So if you look at them from above, they have that nice radial symmetry. Here's another flower that's really common, especially in the summertime along the roadside. So this is chicory. Chicory is actually edible. You can make tea out of it. But chicory is not native to Ohio. It is naturalized. It is originally from Europe, but basically it's been here so long and it is not invasive in the sense it doesn't really push out any of our native plants. It just thrives in highly disturbed areas like the roadside where there's a lot of traffic and soil disturbance. So chicory does really well. And chicory has a very, very unique color. It almost has that cornflower blue, that kind of desaturated blue color. But they're going to have that distinct radial symmetry, and the leaves bloom, or the flowers bloom along the stem line. It's not going to be at the top, it's going to be along the stem. And their flowers are fairly large, about quarter size as well. Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is actually a host plant for the black swallowtail. They're also known as basket flower. And you can see on the left-hand side of why they get that. So in the fall and winter, basically these are all the seeds and they kind of close up, that flower head closes up almost to form like a basket. Hence the name basket flower. So they're one of the few plants that's really easy to identify in the wintertime, even though they're technically dead and dormant, because of that distinct basically seed head there. But the Queen Anne's lace, here's this flowers in bloom, basically that flat multi-head of multiple flowers there, that compound flower head. They have really lacy leaves. You can kind of get a little taste of that here underneath. You can see they almost look, the leaves look really like branching trees there as well. They get that's Queen Anne's lace based on the flowers and the leaves themselves. So here's more Queen Anne's lace. You can see the fertilized seeds up here that are starting to form their basket, and then the newly blooming flowers as well. And they can basically cover fields. They like highly disturbed soils, so they'll grow pretty much anywhere. Roadsides, though, by far the most common place you'll see them. And in like new housing developments, things like that are places that you can easily find them as well. They're also known as wild carrot. They are in the carrot family. So quick quiz. Does anybody remember what Ohio state flower is? Is the trillium, the large flower.
Trillium.
Yes, the trillium. They're so cool to see. They're one of my favorites. The large flower trillium. We have a whole bunch of different species of trillium, but the large flower one is going to be one of the most showy. And do we remember what all trilliums have in common?
They're tri-shaped.
Yes, they have that tri. That's how we remember. They have the leaves of three. It's these we don't have to let be, like poison ivy does. These aren't going to hurt us, but they have that distinctive Parts of 3.
I have a question.
Yes.
It looks like they're purple centered.
Yes, so that's the toad shade. So that's a Sessile Trillium. It's going to have that like mahogany, maroon center versus the large flowered, which is going to have that white. The large flowered before it blooms is going to look almost like it's going to be like lime green.
Okay.
So does this flower have regular or irregular symmetry?
Regular.
Regular, yes. That nice radial, lots of lines of symmetry. And that's the wild blue phlox again. Do we know the name of any of the ones? We just talked about this a little bit earlier, and there's multiple ones that fit this, but that produces fruit that both people and wildlife like to eat.
The violet.
The violet's one. This is the big one, the mayapple. It's the fruit of the mayapple that a lot of people like to eat. The violet's actually really cool. I like candied violets when you candy the flower. Mayapples actually, it's hard. They almost taste like custardy to me. They're a really interesting taste. It's really hard to describe them. But the mayapples is a food source for a lot of animals, especially in the summertime. Regular or irregular? For the
Regular.
Irregular.
Irregular, yes. I have a little bit. I love this flower. This flower cracks me up every time I see it. Just, you can see the pantaloons. But yes, that irregular symmetry. It has that only that one plane of symmetry among it, and that's the Dutchman breeches. And then what is this flower that forms large carpeted in the forest floor?
Virginia Bluebells.
Yes, Virginia Bluebell. And if you ever get a chance to see these in person, like the pictures don't do it justice. They're awesome, beautiful flowers. And the nutritious leaves one, we had talked about it earlier. It was an answer earlier. The blue violet.
Violet.
So they have the really nutritious leaves, and their flowers are edible as well. But the leaves are really nutritious. You can actually add them to your salads. But wouldn't do that if you find them in your lawn, though. If you don't know where the water has come from, and if you use any herbicide or pesticide, you definitely don't want to put them in your salad then. But if you know where they come from, or you grow them yourself, you can toss them on your salad greens. So this is the book I was talking about, Spring Wildflowers of Ohio, the Field Guide. It is really it covers a lot of flowers, and it shows their bloom time as well, and it sorts them by color. So it's really great for identifying. You can quickly go to the color of the flower that you're seeing. It will let you know kind of what the range where you can find it within Ohio or where it's not found in Ohio, and the bloom time. So you can kind of use it to help narrow down. So you can say, oh, it's April, but this plant is not supposed to bloom until May or June. So I know it's not that one probably. And then sorting by color is always nice as well. So these are great field guides that all of these listed. The Wildflowers of Tennessee is a great one. We share a lot of plants with that region. And then there's the Peterson's Guide to Wildflowers and the Newcomb's Guide to Wildflowers. Well, I personally really like that Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. I find it's a little more technical than some of the other ones, but especially if you're really having trouble identifying a specific plant, it can really help you in terms of almost keying it out. But these are some great resources, and the Division of Wildlife actually has this wildflower guide available online as a PDF. So you can actually request a print copy, or you can download the digital copy and have access to it free of charge. Both of them are free of charge, including the print copy, if you would like that as well. So that's all I have for you to get today. Do you guys have any questions?
I was wondering, Lauren, I noticed that McGee Marsh this year will be open, but you have to make a reservation for like a 2-hour block of time. And I was wondering if you're going to have any restrictions on your boardwalk as to having to make reservations.
No. To my knowledge, right now, it is I don't want to say free for all, but it's unrestricted. We will have signage indicating one-way suggested routes for it, But as of now, we do not have any restrictions. However, depending on when biggest weekend birding gets started, and if we get completely and utterly inundated by people, that might change just based on what we might have to do for capacity. But as of now, there's nothing in the works for restricting people in terms of visiting. Our boardwalk's bigger, and we have 3 separate entrances, so it allows people to get on and off easier than McGee's, which is kind of like a one-way. So to my knowledge, no restrictions yet. The Nature Center is not opening until June 1st. As of now, they changed it again, but the boardwalk is going to remain open, and the bathrooms will still be there.
I have a question, Lauren.
Yes.
Okay, so do you know when the Nature Center at the Wildwood Manor opens?
That I don't know. I'm assuming they're probably going to be opening probably around the same time we are.
Okay.
They might be waiting.
In June?
June, yeah. June 1st is when we're opening. We will have reduced capacity for our building. I don't know what the restrictions will be at the time of June 1st, but we'll be following whatever the governor's recommended restrictions
Okay,
for building capacity.
okay.
But I'm assuming theirs is probably going to open around the same time.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Lauren. You are wonderful as always, and you give so much great information. You left your contact information if anybody
Yes.
has follow-up questions for you. So thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I love seeing the same faces and new faces all the same. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope
And-
everybody has a great day ahead.
Yeah, next month I believe is warblers. That's my big one. I'm excited for that one.
Yeah. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
y'all.
Lauren.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Um,
Have a great day.
Thanks, Rita.
Thanks. You as well. Bye.
Bye.